Welcome to the latest episode of College Basketball Coast to Coast. I'm Matt Zemek. He's Ari Russell, and this is going to be a hybrid live show where we look back at the previous night of college basketball and we look ahead to the next one. So this is the morning of early afternoon on Wednesday, January 8th. So we start by looking at the Tuesday night slate. And Ari, once again, the SEC making the headlines, creating the biggest games, the biggest moments. And so Florida goes from giving up 106 in Rupp Arena on Saturday against Kentucky. It allows just 15 points in the first half to Tennessee. And, Walter Clayton did not shoot well. Gators missed 8 straight shots in that first half at one point, went 3 minutes without scoring, and they're up 19 on the previously unbeaten, now no longer unbeaten, number one team in the country. This Florida team looks like a wagon.
Yeah, I mean, obviously in Rupp, almost pulling off that win, keeping it real close, and then going back home to Gainesville and just completely blowing the doors off the number one team in the country. I mean, we expected that game to be closer just on paper, and it wasn't close the whole game. I just the defensive effort by Florida, again, the glass dominance. They're very physical. They've got, like I said, the 2 guards. You got Clayton, and then you've got Elijah Martin, again, a veteran that has a lot of minutes logged, very athletic, and he had a very good game. Florida, from a defensive effort, just completely shut down all elements of Tennessee. I mean, it was definitely not Tennessee's night last night, but a really impressive bounce back victory for the Gators, and they showed me a lot. Again, they are a legitimate team. To be able to do that to Tennessee, who's the number one team in the country, is just impressive. I mean, to get a win is one thing. To win by 30, that's a whole other level right there. And a lot of blowout games last night in general, not just in the SEC but across the country. Really, and games that you would expect to be closer. We're seeing a lot of blowout games for these ranked teams playing each other. And it's kind of an interesting thing that's been happening early on here in conference play.
So much of sports discussion for me, like I fit it into a Price is Right pricing game. Is this number higher or is that number lower? And so, like what I mean is, like the construct, the framework that I'm getting at, Ari, is does this game say more about the winner being good or the loser being perhaps vulnerable? I would say we both agree this is much more about Florida being good than about any weakness that Tennessee has. This was just Florida putting together a pretty complete performance.
No, absolutely. And again, it just shows you the bounce back ability. I mean, they put a lot of effort, in that loss to Kentucky, which was, like I said, a Ward Gotti fight. It was just a knock 'em out, drag 'em out, 12-round brutality. Both teams played very well, and then they turn around and just dominate an undefeated team, number one overall. So again, these rankings are going to be moving around a lot, especially because 6 of the top 10 teams right now are from the Southeastern Conference, and that's going to be moving around a lot. Whoever that number one slot is, it's most likely going to be Auburn now. But who knows? They have a game this weekend as well. They did win on the road against Texas. Again, road wins hard to come by. Now we turn to what happened to Kentucky, the team that had beaten Florida, right? They get trounced on the road against Georgia, and they pretty much were losing that entire game, and Georgia just held on. So now we're talking about the Georgia Bulldogs being another team in there, being a disruptor. They're not ranked right now, but legitimate. They're going to be a tough place. Going to Athens now is clearly going to be a very difficult road win for the rest of the SEC. And so that's now another team we're speaking of in this conference that you got to worry about. There's no automatic, there's no layup wins in this conference, especially on the road.
And I would just add about Georgia that Georgia beating Kentucky, that's the kind of result which, if it's replicated, a mid-level SEC team beating Kentucky and the other high-end teams of the conference, that is exactly how the SEC is going to get those 12, maybe even 13 bids, at least 10, probably 11. that's exactly how the SEC is going to stack bids. If those mid-level teams can get those wins against the high-end opponents in the conference, because virtually every game a mid-level SEC team plays, a team that's going to finish anywhere from like 8 to 14 in the 16-team conference, almost every game those 8th place through 14th place teams play is going to be a quad one opportunity. Like the mid-level SEC teams are going to get so many bites at the apple for quad ones.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, like we're going to be it's going to be mayhem in that conference the whole year. There's going to be upsets galore. And this is not the last one. This is, but again, Georgia's, if you want to get a sense of Georgia's schedule, right, coming up, moving forward. Okay. So they just beat Kentucky, right? They had lost on Saturday to open against Ole Miss. They play Oklahoma next, which is a home game. They play at Tennessee following that. They play against Auburn. Then they play at Arkansas. Then they play at Florida. Then they play versus South Carolina, and then at Alabama. Hello. So we're going to get a good sense of how good this Georgia team is coming up here. Or not. Because even if they lose some of these games and they're close, it still doesn't tell you how good this team is. But if they can get one of these road wins here in that stretch, I mean, that to me would show me that Georgia is a legitimate, not a contender necessarily for the SEC, but a legitimate tournament team. And those are all quad one games, by the way. So they win, a handful of those. They win 2-3 of those. We're talking Georgia is definitely, in the driver's seat to make the NCAA tournament, and it's hard not to. And that win starting last night against Kentucky was a very important win for Georgia's road moving forward.
So most of the SEC is getting into the NCAA tournament. So I think if we're identifying the SEC teams not likely to make the NCAAs,
right,
LSU is right there at the forefront, having lost to Vanderbilt and then on Tuesday night losing to Missouri. So LSU's behind the 8 ball. Vanderbilt misses an important quality win chance at home to Mississippi State. So the Doors are going to have to do some work. And then tonight, I know we're saving our preview, but just briefly, South Carolina hosts Alabama, gets a bite at the Crimson Tide. South Carolina, also one of the SEC teams, unlikely to make the NCAA tournament from the SEC. One other SEC score of note: Auburn over Texas, 5-point final score, 87-82. But really, Auburn in control virtually the whole way, still led by 14 with over 3 minutes left, and then started to play around with its food. Anything we take, Ari, from that particular game? I mean, it was, Texas covered the spread. It was 10.5, so Texas covers, but Auburn led by a good 12-15 for most of that game on the road. Still, the Tigers still look like a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I mean, again, like they're one of the best 3-point shooting teams in the country, if I'm not mistaken. I have to look at the exact stats last night, which I'll do right now. It looks like they shot actually poorly last night, 38% from 3, which is a little bit below their normal, season average. It's not terrible, 38%, by the way, as a team, but only made 8. Not a concerning. It's a road win again. Texas is a decent team, especially defensively, and they still put up 87 points against a pretty solid defensive unit in Texas, on the road. So, like you said, they were leading by double digits most of that game. The final score is mostly just Texas putting it on at the end, just getting opportunities and executing at the end, but they never really had much of a chance to win that game. That was just one of those things where the score gets kind of padded inwards, where they were losing double digits for the majority. So not really too concerned about the final score in that one. Auburn comes out with a road win. That's what they needed. If you look at it on paper, on the back end, if you didn't watch any of that game, you would like, well, why didn't they beat them by the spread? But if you actually watched the game, you said, they pretty much dominated all facets. So it's one of those things where it's like, all right, how much film are you watching? They do it in college football. It's like, did you really watch this, or you just looked at the final score, right? Or looked at some of the stats, but didn't actually watch what actually happened in the game and saw how dominant the actual game was by one team or another. So, this is one of those games, in my opinion. for Auburn.
Yeah, Texas basically scored a few garbage touchdowns late in the game
Yeah,
when it didn't matter. So yeah, take note. Like that
yeah,
that game was a much more decisive game than a 5-pointer. All right, so now let's go to the Big East and
yeah,
Marquette, Georgetown. Very compelling game. The Hoyas took it to Marquette in the first half. It was extremely close down to the final 2 minutes before Marquette made a few plays. So another game you're going to say you might see Marquette by 8. And so, okay, Marquette with a healthy working margin. No, that was a razor close game. That was a 50-50 game pretty much until the final minute. So really, Ed Cooley's Hoyas,
yeah.
they lose, but they make a real statement. I think a lot of college basketball commentators would say Georgetown actually impressed the nation more in this defeat than in any single victory the Hoyas have attained so far this season. Ari, would you fall in line with that fundamental line of analysis?
Well, yeah, and I mean honestly, like they had a 9-point lead at halftime. Pretty impressive. And again, like Marquette really used that most important particular to the first 2 minutes of the second half, or as often the most important minutes of any game. And Marquette used that time to narrow that 9-point lead down, whittle it down, and pretty much whittled it down. And then it was tied and back and forth pretty much for the much of the second half. 12 minutes, 10 minutes, left in the second half, and a 1 point or tied game up until under 2 minutes again, and then Marquette obviously was able to stretch that margin out. So that final score is not indicative of anything how that game was played. It was a very close, highly contested game. Marquette showing that they are a potential number one overall, not a number one overall seed, but making arguments for being a 1 seed. That's the type of win that really good teams have. Yeah, they struggle, but it also, again, going back to what we're saying, what a lot of people are saying about Georgetown, right? In years past, Georgetown loses that game by double digits, by 20, 25 points, right? Even if they had that lead by 9 at halftime, they're going to lose by a lot, right? In this case, I think that Georgetown has really turned the corner, and I think that this team is right there, not necessarily to win the Big East, but to cause a lot of mayhem. And I bet you going in, I'm going to take a look at the schedule real quick. Okay, when do they have the matchup against Marquette again? Well, that's not until March 1st. So let me tell you something.
Ooh.
That's going to be marked on the calendar. That's circled on the calendar again because they feel like they let this one slip away. In DC, they're not going to let that same thing happen. Again, and then they turn around though. They play Marquette. Now we're really going to see what this Georgetown team is like. They play UConn at home. And we'll get to UConn in a few minutes as well. But I think that Georgetown right now is no longer that bottom dweller. I think Ed Cooley has turned this program around. I think it's clear. You see the way that they play. You see that they're able to go toe to toe against one of the best teams in the country on the road. Almost pull that win out. If they pulled that win out, I mean, all bets are off on Georgetown. But they're going to win a lot more games here in this conference. And for me, they look like a tournament team. Yeah, we're still in early January. But if they keep playing the way that they're playing and play well at home and knock off and get a couple of key road wins, oh, yeah, they're going to be a lock for the tournament. And that's great to see. As I said, on Saturday night, college basketball is better when Georgetown is playing in the postseason and playing in meaningful games in March. It's just better. And that's me being obviously subjective, being a DC native originally, right? And someone that has followed Georgetown basketball for a long time, but that is subjective. But I think there's a lot of people in the media objective to say, yeah, college basketball is better when you got Hoya paranoia back. Not quite back to Hoya paranoia. Michael Graham isn't walking through that locker room, but it's getting better. It's getting healthy. It's getting healthy again.
No question. Let me put this one to you. Who's better right now? St. John's, which beat Xavier on the road in Cincinnati on Tuesday, or Georgetown? You put St. John's and Georgetown on the floor right now. Who's better right now?
That's a good. To me, it's a draw. I think it's 50-50. At this point, it's going to be who's playing at home. They play St. John's on Georgetown plays St. John's on the 14th. At St. John's. So that's going to be the test. We'll see. we'll see next week, who's better. But I think it's going to be reliant on who the home team is in this case. To me, it's a toss up. Both are clear tournament teams, and that's a big win for Patino, in Cincinnati to win against Xavier on the road. Again, road wins in conference are always hard to come by. So anytime you get them, you keep it moving. Doesn't matter if it's by 1 point or 50. You keep it moving. So St. John's, again, lock tournament team. Georgetown more of a surprise, but I kind of put them at even level at this point.
Let's move to the ACC and the obvious big national story in a conference which, as a whole is struggling. Well, Duke's not struggling. Duke stands several notches above pretty much every other team in the conference. We saw that on Tuesday. Pitt is probably an NCAA tournament team. I mean, like at the lower end of the bracket, but, Pitt's probably has a slightly better than 50-50 chance of getting in. Duke beats them by 29, 18-0 run to close the game. And with Cooper Flagg, what sticks out to me, obviously he had a poster dunk, and he seems to do that pretty regularly in each game he plays, and that gets the media attention. But he's a, high-end skill, blue-collar mentality. He throws himself into the fray on the glass. He hands the ball out. He is a good, willing passer. Like he is a balanced player. He's willing to do whatever it takes to win. To me, that's the key insight into Cooper Flagg. How do you assess his game, and how do you assess the Blue Devils overall in the national picture?
Well, I mean, he's, clearly an overall talented player. And like you said, he plays with a lot of blue collar, with that blue collar mentality, which is interesting because if you remember their coach, how he played, John Shire, how he played, a very physical, very blue collar type player. So you could tell that, and even with last year and how they played as well with Shire, still very blue collar team. It's not, a lot of people used to say that Duke teams were soft back in the day. Many, talk about the officiating and everything, and they used to say the same thing about Dean Smith, by the way, in North Carolina, the officiating, and then that got passed off to Coach K once Dean Smith kind of was towards the tail end of his career, and there was definitely some truth to some of that, where they Duke doesn't necessarily get the calls like they used to because Coach K isn't on the sideline being able to manipulate the refereeing. So and the team kind of exemplifies his blue collar style, and maybe that's one of the reasons why Cooper Flagg chose. I mean, obviously Duke is Duke, but also he does have that very blue collar style of play. I mean, he is a New England guy, right? So he is kind of, wasn't from Maine. Yeah, it's kind of, brutally cold there most of the time. So you gotta, you gotta play physical, I guess. But he's a complete player, inside, outside. What is he, 6'9", 6'10", or something like that? He's probably still growing. But he has the skills of a really high skilled two guard, but also the physical attributes of pretty much a power forward at this level. And that's very tough to do. And he's very unselfish as well. So, looks to get everyone else involved. It doesn't, the ball it's not a black hole once it goes to him either. So they do a good job of finding him, and he does a good job of utilizing his skills to get everyone else involved. It's a very good team, and they're still very young and inexperienced because it's a lot of freshman players. But there's a reason why Cooper Flagg and teams are tanking for Cooper Flagg to be the number one overall pick. And I think he's starting to distance himself a little bit. I think Harper might be the second overall player in Rutgers, but I think we're seeing how Rutgers is kind of playing team-wise, and it's not been great. And we're seeing kind of how Duke is starting to really come together as a team, and a lot of that is around Cooper Flagg. And I think he's starting to separate himself as being the number one overall pick because, the way that Duke is playing. And that was just an absolute dominating performance against a pretty solid Pittsburgh team. You expected them to win at home, but, 29 points, and they were dominating that whole game from the tip. So not that surprised, but it's actually interesting to see that Duke is really putting it together this early on. And they do have, the ACC is pretty weak this year, so they should, whoop up on a lot of the competition in the conference, which will help them kind of get together. But it's also, and they had a pretty tough non-conference schedule as well, um, which will prepare them for March. But ACC play, they're not really going to get too many. They're not going to get too many clocks in the chin really this year at all. I mean, maybe North Carolina, maybe Clemson, who's physical. But I don't see anybody else. They might get one loss against Virginia Tech or Florida State, who normally sneaks one in usually every year. We'll see. But yeah, they're a part. They look the part of a 1 seed at this point early.
Now, you mentioned, just on the heels of what you just said about the ACC schedule, it's a pretty thin league. It's pretty top heavy. There's Duke and not a whole lot else. But among the whole lot else, Louisville could finish second in the ACC. And one of the notable results from Tuesday that we're going to talk about next, Louisville beating Clemson by 10. Pat Kelsey, we talked about Georgetown with Ed Cooley. Like, that seems like a coach and a program. They're headed on the way up. They're going to be a major player in the coming years of college basketball. It seems very similar at Louisville. Pat Kelsey can coach. Like, he is proving it over and over. Let's remember, no Kashawn Pryor, who's a really important player. Like, Louisville's early season success, Pryor was really central to all of that. They lose him for the season, and yet Kelsey is managing to bounce back. And again, what you said about the ACC schedule, Louisville has already played Duke, Carolina, and Clemson, went 2-1 against that trio. So now the schedule for Louisville over the next several weeks, pretty manageable. At the ACC tournament, it could be Duke with the 1 seed and Louisville with the 2 seed. Your overview of that Louisville Clemson result and what you think it means.
Yeah, I mean, look, Clemson, I think, was the other possible lock of the ACC at this point, making it. Considering their success outside the conference, and their start inside the conference. I think they're 3-1 now. So, and their first loss to Louisville. That Louisville, that's an important win for them. We see now, okay, they're able to now compete. They obviously have beaten North Carolina as well. North Carolina is also 3. So all of them are tied at 3-1. Really they're in that second place at this point. Early on. That's 2 wins against 2 of the teams that are aiming to make the tournament. I don't think this team is making, if they'll be lucky to get 4 in. Depends on what happens in the ACC tournament. So, Louisville at this point has injected themselves early on, and with that more favorable schedule moving forward, to possibly, be one of those people in the tournament. So, big win against Clemson last night. Clemson probably didn't need that necessarily to get that win, but it would have been big for them. But it was probably more important for Louisville moving forward. And as you said, the coaching staff, what they have done to be able to turn that program around from where it was, 2-3 years ago, that's pretty remarkable now. It's a storied program, as we all know. But to see where they are at right now and to see them have success and now really start the season off, with a winning record in the conference, I'd have to say that's a very impressive start for Louisville.
All right, we're going to hit Wednesday and preview Wednesday, but before that, 2 more games from Tuesday to hit because they were both significant. Is Happy learning how to putt? And I'm talking about the Arizona Wildcats. Like, they struggled a lot through Christmas, hovering near 500. Tommy Lloyd struggling to get his team to not only play together, but to play tough, with force. Eric Spoelstra of the Miami Heat, he loves saying, we need to play with force. The opponent needs to feel us. Well, Arizona wasn't playing with force, but maybe Happy's learning how to putt. Arizona goes into Morgantown, doesn't just beat West Virginia, it beats down the Mountaineers. And West Virginia beat Arizona in Atlantis earlier this season. So, this is a big turnaround. This is a very different Arizona team. It seems as though Tommy Lloyd has really figured something out with his ball club, Ari. I mean, what are you seeing from Arizona in terms of the change that the Wildcats have made. Getting a road win in Cincinnati, another road win in Morgantown. This is the team that we expected to see before the season began.
Yeah, I think so. Again, back-to-back road wins right now in the Big 12, huge. I mean, those were must wins for Arizona, and they got them. And again, now turning around, I think the confidence they got from that Cincinnati win, turning around and going into Morgantown and then beating the doors off of Mountaineers going down there. I'm telling you that's a huge victory for the Wildcats. They needed it. I think that's going to be enough confidence for pushing them, forward into the rest of the Big 12 season. It's not going to be easy. There's a lot of really strong teams, like we said earlier. You've got Iowa State. You obviously got Kansas, but you got Baylor. You got a lot of teams in that conference that are also. It has a lot of really good mid-level teams, and Arizona and West Virginia and Cincinnati are kind of in that, I would say, kind of that second level of the Big 12. And they got two very much needed road wins there, which, again, hard to come by in any conference. But in the Big 12 in particular, Cincinnati, very tough place to play. No one likes to go into Morgantown either. So big win for Floyd and the Wildcats. It's good to see them kind of get it around, and the season obviously at this point is wide open for them, and they're off to a pretty solid start at this point after having kind of a rough 2024. I think it's starting to look pretty nice for them so far.
And one more from Tuesday, Michigan.
Yes.
Now this was a weird one. This was a weird one, Ari. Michigan goes up 37-19 at UCLA Pauley Pavilion. Loses the entirety of that lead. UCLA briefly edged in front midway through the second half. Final score, Michigan 94, UCLA 75. Michigan scores 34 points in the final 10-plus minutes. So, just these huge pendulum swings. Michigan up 18, loses the whole lead, winds up winning by 19. And, UCLA, this is beginning to be a problem for Mick Cronin. UCLA will have good patches in games. So, it made the full comeback from an 18-point deficit, but then craters late. Last weekend against Nebraska, UCLA gave up a 15-0 run to Nebraska, got a 15-0 run to take a 7-point lead, winds up losing by 8. So, UCLA is just lacking stability. It's kind of shocking to see. But on the other side, Ari, and Dusty May pretty well, the run to the Final Four at Florida Atlantic, Dusty May really has something with the two big setup, Vlad Golden and Danny Wolf. Vlad Golden scores 36 against UCLA on the road. When this Michigan team clicks, this is a really tough out. The problem with Michigan is that it blows the leads right after it builds them. But this offense can be a wagon when everything's going right. Michigan looks like a sleeper team, wouldn't you say? Kind of that 4 or 5 seed that you won't want any part of in March.
Well, no, I mean, and the intensity that May coaches and the way that he gets his players to play, with that level of intensity across the board, is obviously has transferred over from Florida Atlantic to Michigan, and you see why they hired him. He's a hell of a coach and gets guys to buy in. And, the emergence of Golden too. I mean, his play has improved every single year. We saw him as a sophomore. He just is getting better, a skilled player, much more mobile and agile. His footwork has just gotten better. He's just a lot more effective in the paint. It's funny. We talk about May. Cronin, on the other hand, just buried his team in the post conference, just called him soft. I mean, it was kind of what Pitino did last year with St. John's, calling his team out. I think he's trying to take from the same playbook there, calling his team out, saying, they're soft. It's one of those things that to see, okay, where it's heat check on your own team. Okay, where are you at? What type of ticker you got right there? And they're going to need that, because that's back-to-back losses, and Michigan goes out west to California and pulls that sweep. Those are going into Pauley again. those are impressive wins. Michigan is shooting up the power rankings at this point. Really looking impressive early on in Big Ten play, getting 2 massive road wins, including last night, just totally burying and putting UCLA in the dirt like that. Again, and blowing a lead, but also blowing a lead and then taking it back, with a vengeance. That is going to be something that's not going to be able to happen all the time. There are going to be teams where, yeah, you blow the lead and they're going to put you in the dirt, right? Especially in the Big Ten, that's going to happen. So that's one of the issues that Michigan has to kind of rein in. And if I do recall, FAU was very similar, frantic as well. They played where it's just like, not only could you not go, like you would be, and I saw it against the Kansas State in the tournament. It looked like Kansas State was pulling away. They're up double digits in the second half, right? And then all of a sudden it's like boom, and all of a sudden if FAU's up 4, and then they're up 10, and then they give up that lead. So it seems like they play very frantically at times, and maybe that's part of kind of the mystique of Dustin May, but it's highly effective when you got really good ball players on your team that can score buckets, and they do have quite a few of them on that Michigan team. And again, like you said, the Wolf and Golden up front is very difficult matchup for a lot of teams, a lot of and on both ends of the court, because they're both very physical and can defend the rim and also get some buckets in the paint. And also create a lot of havoc with high screens and everything like that. They do a lot. And it's a very tough team, but they are going to have to worry about blowing those leads like that, because that's going to be a problem with some of the other Big Ten teams that aren't going to let that happen and aren't going to be considered soft in Mick Cronin's terms.
And just one thing for everyone to think about watching here on College Basketball Coast to Coast. Right now, would you take Michigan or Illinois versus the field in the Big Ten? I'm just gonna put that out there. That's not for you, Ari. I'm just like, that is a question for you to think about. We will see what the state of play, the balance of power is in the Big Ten over these next few weeks. All right, let's move on to Wednesday. So now we go into preview mode. Ari, you said we were going to talk about UConn. This is the time to do it. UConn versus Villanova, 6:30 Eastern, Fox Sports 1. Really interesting game. And, UConn with Liam McNeely out was able to rally past Providence. What are you looking for from UConn versus Villanova tonight?
Well, I mean, again, UConn was behind in Providence and come back and win that game. They obviously had, 3 straight losses in the tournament. Where were they? Was that Maui, I think? I don't think they're ever going to go back to Maui because that was a disaster. And it looked like, oh, what's going on with this UConn team? But they haven't lost since, so they're on a roll. Villanova, a team that really came out the gates, bad. Losing to Columbia, also losing to St. Joseph's. They shouldn't have. That's a Big 5 matchup, but again, a Big 5 matchup is a rivalry game, but they should have won that game. They have 5 losses already, but they're 3-1 in the conference, and their only loss is at Creighton. So it's a road game. That right now they're at home. Right now, Eric Dixon looks like possibly a potential Player of the Year candidate, not just for the Big East, but nationally. And he's a problem. He's a big problem. They also got former Miami transfer Wooga Poplar, who's kind of like his Robin. If Eric Dixon is Batman, then Wooga Poplar is Robin, another guy that's kind of a Swiss Army knife of a player that can do a lot, very good defensively. He's healthy this year. Last year he had major ankle problems, lower extremity issues that hampered his athleticism. Very physical team. Obviously, it's Villanova, Big East. Most of these teams are very physical. I like how they ref the Big East, kind of like how they used to ref the Big East, where they'll let them play generally. I prefer that because that's kind of how the old school Big East used to be. Remember they used to give 6 fouls in the Big East, which actually hurt them during the tournament because they were used to that extra foul. They had to get rid of that. They're like, wait, we're actually hurting ourselves in the tournament. But this is a huge test for Villanova to see, are they a legit tournament team? They need this win. I think this is a major test for Villanova in order for them to have the road for the NCAA tournament, mainly because of kind of how they sputtered out the gates earlier on the season. They definitely seem to be turning it around a lot more. But this is I'm not saying it's a must win, but it's a key win for Villanova at this point. You know, UConn again, they would get another key road win if they're able to pull this one off, and again show us why they're a top 10 team in the country and looking for the three-peat. But for Villanova, a win would be a massive resume builder for them, and be quite disruptive for the Big East standings at this point. So and would put them right in the mix to be at the top of the Big East, because you would get one loss and you would give UConn their first loss in the conference, and then so then it's really going to see who is really legit. So we'll see what happens. If is Villanova up to the challenge to compete against UConn? Can they keep it close? Providence was able to keep it close. They just weren't able to hold on. We'll see. It's really going to come down to the play of Dixon and Poplar. Those are the two key players. And if UConn is able to neutralize Dixon enough, now they don't have to stop him completely, but neutralize him enough not to cause too many problems, especially in the paint.
It's going to be fascinating. I think that UConn being able to come back from a double-digit halftime deficit against Providence, that probably fills UConn with a lot of confidence. So in many ways, Ari, I mean, games aren't usually decided in the first 10 minutes, but I think whoever throws the first punch feels good about itself. I think that's going to shape how that game goes. Like if UConn falls behind by 12 at halftime again, this time on the road, probably doesn't end well for UConn. So I think the start of that game is going to be, I don't assign too much weight to starts of games usually, but I think this might be an exception.
Maybe
it's going to be interesting what happens.
Maybe UConn is also a team that, they're a second half team anyway, always have been. So to me, it's never really. It doesn't matter what the start is. I mean, for Villanova, I think, it does matter for the start, but less for UConn. Because, again, they can be down double digits and look dominated again. And all of a sudden, it's just like a switch turns on for them in the second half. It's been the same. It was the same. I mean, what we saw against Providence was similar to what we've seen against previous years with UConn, and how all of a sudden something else happens, something sparks them, and they go on this run, and then it's just like the other team looks like what happened, looks like they're frozen in time, and it's just weird. It's just interesting how it plays out, even though it's a completely different team than it was last year, and the last year's team was a completely different team than it was in 2023. And so now we're in 2025. This team is completely different roster, but they still have that. So again, for Villanova, getting off to that important start in the first half is important for them. For UConn, not as much. In this case, it's just keeping it close. You never want to get behind double digits to UConn, because once you're behind double digits at UConn, the mentality just goes like it's it for them. Like they smell blood, and once they smell blood, it's a wrap. And we saw that for years. To any Danny Hurley team, it just seems like once we get that 10-point lead, like forget about it. You're not coming back against us, and we're going to beat you by 30. So I don't know how he does it.
You're right. You're definitely right that UConn's a second half team. I think the interesting part about the Providence game, though, is that no Liam McNeely, and then that UConn's bad first half was because of the uncertainty about finding a formula without McNeely. So I think that's why the start of this game registers a little bit more for me. But you're absolutely right. UConn's a second half team, and UConn's not going to panic if it does fall behind early. No question about that. All right. Continuing through our Wednesday schedule, lots of interesting games in the SEC. I mean, there are always going to be interesting games in the SEC because, again, a conference that's going to get maybe 12, even 13 NCAA bids, you're basically having NCAA tournament quality games most nights on the slate. So, Ari, we have Alabama going to South Carolina. And again, South Carolina, probably the one SEC team that's likely to not get in. But if South Carolina wants to make a statement, well, here you go. Here is the Gamecocks' big chance to do something. And we also have Ole Miss going to John Calipari in Arkansas. So John Calipari Now in Fayetteville, Calipari is now going to try and make Bud Walton Arena a madhouse again. And we also have a very fascinating game, Texas A&M. And by the way, no Wade Taylor for the Aggies in this game, or at least he's unlikely to play. Maybe there'll be a last minute change, but the word we've been getting several hours before tip off, no Wade Taylor for A&M going to Oklahoma. And we talked about Oklahoma, Ari, on our Saturday night, Sunday morning show here at College Basketball Coast to Coast. Great in the non-con, got buried by Alabama. Are we going to see major regression from the Sooners? So a huge game for them here. So Bama, South Carolina, Ole Miss at Arkansas, A&M at Oklahoma. You can pick one of those games. You can look at all three, take them as a trifecta. What are you looking for on the SEC slate Wednesday night?
Well, and at first it's like Arkansas, like they need this win more than Ole Miss does. This is a huge bounce back for them. They don't want to get into the hole too deep in this conference. Again, it's going to be a heavyweight fight each week, twice a week in this conference. So you're going to need to win those home games against an Ole Miss team that's very solid. So to me, that's a must-win game. Oklahoma as well. Like that's another, again, the home teams, it's a must-win. Now, South Carolina, we don't expect them to be – we expect them – with the expectations are for them to be the bottom side in a non-tournament team. So I'm not expecting them to win. If they do win, that's huge. Alabama doesn't necessarily need that win. South Carolina, in order for them to think that they can make the tournament, obviously that's a must win. But I don't see that. But I'm wrong often. But to me, like it is a must win for both Oklahoma. It's a must win for Arkansas at this point. You got to get those wins at home in the conference. And for me, if Texas A&M is able to pull it off again, like I said on Saturday, to me, they're the dark horse in this conference. I think they have a lot of a makeup to be very disruptive, not necessarily to win the conference, but to be a big problem and cause a lot of damage to amongst the top teams in that conference. And then also in the NCAA tournament, to be maybe one of the surprise teams to go deeper in the tournament than some of these higher seeded teams are. To me, how they perform in Norman is going to be tonight at 9 Eastern, 8 Central. It's going to be a very important kind of temperature check to see, where this Texas A&M team is going to be, tonight. So, those two games, Arkansas, we're going to have to see them perform well at home, and Oklahoma tonight, we're going to have to see how well they perform at home. I'm excited to see what Texas A&M can bring on the road here to see if they are actually going to fill what I've been saying about them pretty much since I saw them at the beginning of the season.
Two other games from Wednesday's slate that we want to hit, both intriguing in their own ways. Penn State at Illinois in the Big Ten, and Arizona State at Kansas in the Big 12. And so to set the table for these games, Penn State got ambushed by Indiana on Sunday. That was not a result most people, I think, were expecting. So Penn State's in a bounce back spot, and Illinois just went to the Pacific Northwest, handled that long distance West Coast travel in the new look Big Ten, crushed Oregon, and then turns around and handles Washington. Washington put up a fight, but Illinois was able to stand strong late. And so Illinois making a push toward the top of the Big Ten standings. Does Penn State have an answer for Illinois? Let's tackle that one, Ari, in the Big Ten. As again, Illinois and Michigan making some strong statements right now. Will the challengers rise up and knock down the Illini and the Wolverines? So Penn State, Illinois takes on added importance here.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, again, Penn State winning on the road here would be a massive win for them in their resume. And it would also be super disruptive in the top of the Big Ten standings. But I would expect the crowd at Illinois tonight to be raucous. I mean, they must be absolutely pumped up after watching their team on TV on the road go out west, the Pacific Northwest, and get 2 wins. That does impress, especially the Oregon win, which was just a remarkable victory. So I expect it to be absolutely insane there tonight. So I think that's going to play a role. It's going to be very difficult and very loud for Penn State. I mean, they're going to have to be on their A game. They're going to have to to shoot at a very high percentage, not turn the ball over, because this can get ugly fast. For the Nittany Lions, it ain't the college football playoff. They're gonna have to have their deep. They're gonna have to have the Nittany Lion football defense tonight against Illinois to have a chance. So
let's do Arizona State.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, doing Arizona State, Kansas. Again, Arizona State, they're 10-3 right now. Obviously, getting wins in Fog Allen is not something that happens that often. I mean, this would be a huge upset. Not just because of the rankings or whatever. Forget the rankings. Just that Fog Allen is what it is. And Kansas has had all these preseason expectations. Many had them number 1 overall, possibly be winning the national title. Granted, they've had a couple slip-ups here and there, haven't looked great. Obviously there's some health issues here or there. But this would be a massive victory for Sparky from where you are. And you're closer to that program, obviously, because they're in your backyard. So, what are your thoughts on Arizona State's chances in Fog?
Arizona State just crushed Colorado, and I'm not saying Colorado is a great team, but Colorado beat UConn in Maui. So that's not a terrible team. And Arizona State took Colorado.
Yeah, well, they're one of those middle-level teams, and I think Arizona State's another one of those middle-level teams in the Big 12 that's probably a bubble team. So this would go a long way for Arizona State winning. A more of a disruptive win. There's a lot of games tonight that are, that it's not really a must win for Kansas, obviously, but it's not necessarily a must win for Arizona, but it would be a huge resume builder, obviously, if you're winning on the road against Kansas. I mean, there's a lot of quad 1 games tonight against teams that, like you said, Arizona's crushed Colorado, and they're going to be competing against Colorado for a bubble spot anyway. I think the whole year. So that win is big for them. They can really boost their resume. It's early on, but boost that quad 1 win tonight, get a premier quad 1 win against the Kansas squad at Fog. So, they I'm sure they're coming in with a hell of a lot of confidence tonight, and probably going to be playing really loose because of it, because they know that the expectations are not to get the win. And Kansas is probably playing a little tight. Look, they already have a loss in the conference, so that can play a role too. Sometimes teams play tight because they're, you kind of get the check on them to see what's ticking inside their chest there. So I expect Arizona State to play loose. I don't expect them to win, but and Kansas could be playing tight, and they shouldn't be. If they're playing loose, then I expect Kansas to handle their business pretty easy.
Yeah, so with Arizona State, this is a team that challenged itself in non-conference play. Played St. Mary's, played Santa Clara, played New Mexico, played Grand Canyon, and won all 4 of those games. There's a lot of solid wins on Arizona State's plate. That New Mexico win looks better and better. New Mexico 5-0 in the Mountain West. So the Arizona State's profile looks pretty good. My question for you, Ari, not just about this Arizona State-Kansas game, but more broadly, about Kansas and the Big 12 in general. So Kansas loses at home to West Virginia, then beats UCF by 51. UCF, which just lost to Kansas by 51, went into Lubbock and beat Texas Tech. We just got done with a Big 12 football season where everything just went wildly up and down. It was really hard to predict the Big 12 in football game to game. Kind of feeling like that in Big 12 basketball, with the exception of Houston. Houston is just putting everybody away. Houston does what Houston does, but really the rest of the Big 12, also Iowa State is dump trucking people. But aside from Houston and Iowa State, lots of volatility. Kansas is part of that. Do you think that we're going to see the emergence of some stability in the non-Houston, non-Iowa State parts of the Big 12, or is this going to be a roller coaster for the next 2 months?
I mean, tonight we're gonna see. Tonight we're gonna definitely see.
Well, tonight will tell
Tonight will tell us that tale. the rest of the conference is going to be topsy-turvy the rest of the year because, if Arizona, if Sparky gets that win, then we're going to be like, okay, well, Kansas is going to be part of that up and down, I guess, majority of the Big 12 conference this year. And they're not going to be with the stability of Houston and Iowa State. Again, like you said, Iowa State has been tearing everybody up. They look like the class. Houston, is started off very strong as well. So again, there's a lot of meat in this conference. Not necessarily as robust as it is in the SEC, but man, this is a very, very competitive conference. It's going to be a fun game, in Lawrence tonight, and very telling to what we should be expecting the rest of the year. I expect it to be mayhem in the conference, just like it was in football, and that's great because that makes it more exciting and less predictable and better for what we do. Because then, I'm a terrible prognosticator. If you want to lose money, by the way, I know we do a lot of betting shows and everything like that. TJ has been particular, does a lot of the betting shows and all that stuff. If you want to lose money, or you're hedging and stuff like that, or just talk to me and I'll make sure that you lose money on your bets, because I'm the worst at prognosticating anything. I'm good at breaking some of the games down. I can't predict anything. I can't predict nothing. So if you want to lose money, come to me. I got you.
It's going to be fascinating. And so as we head into the Wednesday night slate, lots to chew on. Ari Russell, thank you for joining me here at College Basketball Coast to Coast. And folks, we're going to make sure that we're giving you at least a weekly show on Saturday night or Sunday morning on the weekends. But hey, we were able to fit in a midweek show. So we don't have an ironclad absolute schedule, but definitely coming to you each week on the road to the Final Four. And ideally, we're going to add some midweek shows such as this one to give you plenty of content, plenty of things to chew on in the world of college basketball. Ari, thank you so much. See you down the line as we cover a fascinating college basketball season here at College Basketball Coast to Coast.